Get the fuck away from my patient." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because the man who said it was flat on his back, soaked in his own blood, with 3 bullets still doing their damage inside him. And he said it to a surgeon, not a threat, a command. The kind that came from somewhere deeper than pain, deeper than fear, deeper than the instinct to survive. Dr. Harlan Reed froze with his hands still outstretched over the gurney. Every nurse in that trauma bay stopped. And then the dying man turned his head, found the one face in the room he had come here specifically to find, and said 2 words that made Reed's face go white. If you've never been in a room where a single name changes everything, keep watching. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The night Emma Calloway walked into Mercy General Hospital for the first time, she carried 1 duffel bag, 1 manila envelope with her nursing credentials, and absolutely nothing else. No photographs, no decorations for her locker, no small talk when the charge nurse, a heavy-set woman named Donna with reading glasses perpetually perched on her forehead, asked her where she'd worked before. "Different places," Emma said. Donna waited for more. Emma didn't offer any. That should have been the first sign. But hospitals are busy places, and busy places don't have time to read between lines. Donna stamped her paperwork, handed her a badge, and pointed her toward the trauma wing. "Night shift," Donna said. "You start tonight." Emma nodded once, clipped the badge to her scrubs, and walked away without asking where the break room was, or when lunch happened, or any of the 100 questions new employees usually asked. She just walked. And the way she walked, straight-backed, eyes forward, scanning the hallway without looking like she was scanning it, that too should have been a sign. But nobody noticed. Nobody ever did, and that was exactly the point. Emma was 38 years old. She had cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, and dark eyes that didn't flinch when things got loud or bloody, or both at the same time. She was not particularly tall and not particularly imposing. And that, more than anything, was the armor she'd worn her entire adult life. People looked past her. People forgot she was in the room. She had spent years perfecting that particular art of invisibility, and now, on the outside, working in a civilian hospital, surrounded by civilians who had no idea what the world actually looked like when the lights went out and the maps ran out, and the only thing standing between a mission and catastrophe was the person willing to make an impossible call. She wore that invisibility like a second skin. The trauma wing at Mercy General was not a quiet place on a Thursday night. 3 car accident victims had come in within the first hour of Emma's shift. A teenager with a broken wrist from a skateboarding incident had been crying in Bay 4 since 7 o'clock. 2 gunshot wounds, both stable, both angry about being stable, were waiting for surgery consults. Emma moved through all of it like she'd been born doing this exact job, which in some ways she had. She started IVs before nurses twice her experience had even found the vein. She read vitals with a single glance. She positioned herself in exactly the right spot every single time so that when a physician needed an instrument or a second pair of hands, Emma was already there. She didn't announce herself. She didn't ask for credit. She just worked. Dr. Harlan Reed noticed her on her 3rd night. He noticed her the way a man notices a wrench he didn't put in his toolbox, with suspicion, with a faint irritation he couldn't quite justify. Reed was 52 years old, chief of trauma surgery, a man who had published 14 papers in peer-reviewed journals and who kept framed copies of every one of them in his office in a row so precise it suggested he had used a ruler. He was the kind of doctor who walked into a room and expected it to rearrange itself around him. And for 20 years, it had. Nurses anticipated his requests before he made them. Residents laughed at his jokes that weren't funny. Administrators gave him the best parking spot and pretended it was accidental. He was brilliant, genuinely, undeniably brilliant, and he knew it in a way that had long since curdled from confidence into something harder and less forgiving. "Who are you?" he said to Emma on that third night, not looking up from the chart he was reviewing, his tone the same he used for asking where he'd left his pen. "Emma Calloway, night shift trauma nurse. Where'd you come from?" "Agency placement." He looked up then. He had pale blue eyes that were probably handsome once and now just looked cold. He looked at her the way he looked at residents who gave wrong answers, like he was already disappointed and hadn't decided yet if the disappointment was worth his time. "You repositioned Mr. Garza's drainage tube last night," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I didn't order that." His output numbers were off. The angle was causing a partial blockage. "I adjusted it." The room was very quiet. A junior resident named Peters, who had been pretending to review labs on a nearby tablet, had gone completely still. "You adjusted it," Reed repeated. "Yes. Based on your nursing assessment. Based on what was in front of me." Reed set the chart down with a deliberateness that was louder than if he'd thrown it. "Let me explain something to you, Nurse Calloway. This is my trauma wing. These are my patients. When I write an order, that order is the last word on the subject. When I don't write an order, that is also the last word on the subject. You are not here to think. You are here to execute. Do you understand the difference?" Emma looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something deep and old and entirely contained. And then she said, "Mr. Garza's output normalized within 40 minutes of the adjustment. His fever broke by morning." Reed's jaw tightened. "That's not the point." "I know," Emma said. "That's why I'm telling you." She walked away. Reed stared after her. Peters found somewhere else to be with remarkable urgency. That was how it started. Over the following weeks, it became a pattern. Reed would make a call. Emma would execute it, but sometimes, not always, sometimes she would also do one additional thing that wasn't on the order. One adjustment, one small correction, one quiet intervention that she never announced and never explained unless directly confronted. And every single time, without exception, the patient outcome was better for it. Reed hated this. He hated it with a precision that matched his surgical technique, methodically, thoroughly, without leaving any room for doubt. He began assigning Emma to the least critical bays. He stopped acknowledging her in rounds. He spoke to her in front of staff in a tone so dismissive it was almost performative, as if he needed witnesses to his authority the way some men needed witnesses to their wealth. The other nurses noticed. Most of them kept their heads down. Donna, who had been at Mercy General for 23 years and had survived 3 chiefs of surgery and 2 hospital ownership changes, watched all of it from behind her reading glasses and said nothing. Though occasionally, when Emma walked past the nurses' station after one of Reed's public corrections, Donna would slide a cup of coffee across the counter without comment, and Emma would take it without comment, and that small, wordless exchange was the closest thing Emma Calloway had to an alliance in that building. The nurses talked about her in the break room when she wasn't there. Not unkindly, mostly. There was a quality to Emma that made people slightly nervous and slightly drawn to her at the same time, the way people are drawn to a locked door. She was competent beyond any explanation her credentials provided. She was calm in situations that broke other people. She never talked about herself, not her family, not her history, not her weekends, not her apartment, nothing. She deflected personal questions with the skill of someone who had practiced deflecting questions from people far more trained than curious coworkers. "You think she's got a past?" said Marcus, a male nurse who worked the day-night overlap shift, and who had been at Mercy General long enough to have opinions about everyone. "Everyone's got a past," Donna said, without looking up from her scheduling board. "I mean, a past. I know what you mean. She doesn't talk about where she worked before. I looked her up, agency placement, but the agency barely has a web presence, like it exists on paper and nowhere else." Donna took off her reading glasses and looked at Marcus directly. "Marcus," she said, "in 23 years of working trauma nursing, I have learned one thing above everything else. When someone is that good at what they do and that quiet about how they got that good, you do not go looking. You just thank God they're on your team and you go home and sleep. She put her glasses back on. Go check on bay 6. Marcus went to check on bay 6. Emma, meanwhile, continued to work her shifts. She continued to arrive exactly on time and leave exactly on time. She continued to save lives in ways that didn't show up cleanly on incident reports. And she continued to endure Dr. Harlan Reed's particular brand of institutional contempt with a composure that some of the younger nurses found inspiring and others found unnerving, because there was something underneath it that didn't read like patience. It read like restraint, like a woman who had choices and was choosing, carefully and deliberately, the one that kept everyone in the room safe. Then came the night of November 14th. It started like most bad nights started in trauma, with too much happening too fast and not enough hands to manage it. A multi-vehicle accident on the interstate had sent 4 patients in within 30 minutes. Reed was already in surgery on a ruptured spleen. 2 other attendings were tied up. The ER was running on a skeleton crew of residents and nurses. And then the radio crackled and the paramedics' voices came through with an urgency that cut through the general chaos like a blade. Incoming, single male, multiple GSW to the chest and abdomen, approximate age late 30s, critical, ETA 90 seconds. Be advised, patient is combative. Repeat, patient is combative. Peters, the junior resident who had witnessed the drainage tube confrontation weeks earlier, was the senior physician available. He was 29 years old, 3 years out of medical school, and his hands had started trembling slightly the moment the radio call came in. He looked around the trauma bay with an expression that was working very hard to look like it wasn't terror. Emma was already at the trauma bay door. "You've got this," she said to Peters, not looking at him, her eyes on the ambulance bay entrance. "He's critical," Peters said. "I should wait for Reed. Reed is in surgery. You're what he's got. Breathe." Peters breathed. The doors blew open. The man on the gurney was large, not in a casual way, in the way of a person whose entire body had been built for a specific purpose over many years of very specific work. Even laid out, even bleeding from wounds that should have put an ordinary man out cold before the ambulance doors closed. Even with an oxygen mask over his face and 2 paramedics leaning hard on pressure dressings, he radiated something that the word danger didn't quite cover. It was more than that. It was the particular gravity of someone who had been in situations so far past dangerous that danger had become just a baseline condition of existence. The paramedics were talking fast. 3 gunshot wounds, 1 to the chest, 2 to the abdomen, BP dropping, no ID on the patient, no next of kin information. He'd been found alone at an industrial site 2 miles from the hospital. He was conscious, barely, and he was making their lives very difficult. Because he would not stop fighting them, not flailing, not panicking, fighting, deliberately, methodically, even in his current state, resisting the restraints with a controlled aggression that had already required 2 of the larger paramedics to hold down his arms. His head was turning, eyes moving, taking in the trauma bay in the rapid, systematic way of someone performing a threat assessment, even while bleeding to death. "Sir, I need you to calm down," Peters said, moving to the bedside. "You're in Mercy General Hospital. We're going to help you." The man's eyes landed on Peters. "No," he said. The word came out quiet and absolute. "Sir, you have 3 gunshot wounds. I need you to let us—" "I said no." His voice was fraying at the edges, rough with pain and blood loss, but the command inside it was intact. "Don't touch me." Peters looked at Emma. Emma was already on the other side of the gurney, pulling the IV kit from the supply cart. She moved with the kind of economy that didn't waste a single motion. And she was watching the patient the way she watched everything, with that deep, reading stillness. "You're going to lose him before we can even start if he doesn't let us work." Peter said quietly. I know, Emma said. Can you talk to him? Emma set the IV kit on the tray and looked at the patient. He was looking at her too. And something happened in that exchange that Peters could not have named. Not then. The patient's breathing didn't slow, and his grip on the gurney rail didn't release, and his body didn't relax. But something in his eyes changed. Just slightly, like a recalibration. You're losing blood fast, Emma said to him. Her voice was even and direct, and without any of the practiced gentleness nurses often deployed with frightened patients. She spoke to him the way you spoke to someone who wanted information, not comfort. If we don't get a line in and get pressure on those wounds in the next 5 minutes, you're done. Not maybe, done. The man looked at her for a long moment. Who are you? He said. Night shift trauma nurse. His eyes narrowed. Something moved behind them, something that looked, impossibly, like recognition. Like a man trying to place a voice he'd heard before in a different context. Where? He said. Emma said nothing. His jaw tightened against the pain. Name. Emma Calloway. Something shifted. Something subtle enough that Peters missed it entirely, but it was there. The man's eyes moved to Emma's badge, then back to her face. And whatever calculation was running behind his expression ran it fast and came out somewhere complicated. IV only, he said. Nobody cuts me open. Nobody puts me under. You need surgery, Peter said. Not from you. Sir, your injuries. I heard you, the man said, and the authority in his voice, even broken in half by blood loss, hit Peters like a physical thing. IV, pressure dressings. Stabilize. I need to make a call. You're not in any condition to. I need to make a call. He turned his head back to Emma. There was something in the way he looked at her that was different from how he'd looked at Peters. Not softer, just different, calibrated differently. You understand me? Emma held his gaze for 1 beat, 2. Then she said, Peters, get me 2 large-bore IVs and hang a unit of O negative. Call radiology and tell them we need a portable chest. Peters stared at her. We can't just. We're not doing nothing, Emma said. We're stabilizing. He's conscious and he's refusing surgical consent, which he has the right to do. So we stabilize and we reassess in 10 minutes. Go. Peters went. Emma bent to the IV setup, hands moving with the smooth certainty of muscle memory. The patient watched her hands. His grip on the gurney rail loosened by a fraction. You've got good hands, he said. His voice was getting rougher, blood loss and effort. Hold still. You're not going to ask me questions about who shot me, where I've been. No. Why not? Emma slid the first IV in with a precision that made the patient's eyebrows move slightly upward despite everything. Because those answers aren't going to help me keep you alive, she said. And right now, keeping you alive is the only thing that matters. The patient made a sound that might have been a laugh in some other context. It came out more like a controlled exhale. Then Reed walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. His surgery had apparently concluded 15 minutes ahead of schedule, and someone, Peters most likely, had paged him. He came through the trauma bay doors, still in his surgical cap. Gloves off, but arms slightly extended the way surgeons held themselves after a procedure, and his eyes swept the room and landed on the gurney, and then on Emma, and his expression went through several rapid changes that settled on the particular combination of authority and irritation that was his default setting for situations where things were not happening the way he had decided they should happen. What is the status on this patient? He said, not to Emma. Peters began to answer. Reed cut him off by walking directly to the gurney and pulling back the pressure dressing to look at the abdominal wounds. The patient's reaction was instantaneous. Don't, he said. Reed didn't stop. 3 entry wounds, possible bowel involvement. I said, don't touch me. The man's hand, moving with a speed that should have been physically impossible, given his condition, closed around Reed's wrist. Reed yanked back. The indignation on his face was total. "Sir, I am the chief of trauma surgery at this hospital, and I am telling you that you need immediate surgical intervention." "And I am telling you," the patient said, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolute and very cold, "to get your hand off my chart and step back from this bed." Reed's face went through something complicated. He was not a man who got spoken to this way. Not in his hospital. Not in his trauma bay. "Sir, I understand you're in pain, but you are making decisions that are going to cost you your life." "Peters," Reed said, pivoting away from the patient with the deliberate dismissal of a man who had decided the patient no longer warranted direct address. "Prepare for emergency laparotomy. Get me a surgical suite in." "He's refused consent," Emma said. The words landed in the room like something dropped on a marble floor. Clean, loud, impossible to ignore. Reed turned to look at her slowly. "I beg your pardon. He's conscious and competent, and he's refused surgical consent. You know the law, Dr. Reed." "He's compromised by blood loss and likely in shock. His GCS is 15, Emma said. Peters assessed him on arrival. He's oriented ×4. He knows where he is, who we are, and what we're telling him. His refusal is legally valid, and you know it." The silence in the room had a specific quality to it. The three other nurses and the respiratory tech who had been hovering at the edges of the space had all gone very still. Peters was staring at the supply cart as if it had suddenly become deeply fascinating. Reed took a step toward Emma. One step. Deliberately. "Nurse Calloway," he said, in the voice he used when he wanted the room to understand that a line was being drawn. "I have been more than tolerant of your tendency to insert your personal judgment into clinical decisions that are above your pay grade. I have allowed it because the outcomes, on balance, have been acceptable. But this patient is going to die if I don't operate in the next 20 minutes. So I am going to ask you, very clearly, to take your IV bags and your opinions and step back. And I am going to do my job." Emma did not step back. She stood exactly where she was, beside the patient's head, her hand resting on the IV line she just secured, and she met Reed's gaze with an expression so level and so unafraid that something in the room changed. The temperature didn't change, the lighting didn't change, but something shifted, some unspoken architecture that had always placed Emma beneath Reed in this particular space began, quietly and inexorably, to move. "Get the hell away from my patient," she said, not loud. That was the thing that Peters would remember afterward. That was the detail that got repeated in break rooms for months after this night. She didn't raise her voice. She said it the way you'd state a fact about the weather. Clear, final, without any of the deference or apology or careful softening that 10 years of watching women in this hospital speak to Harlan Reed had conditioned everyone to expect. The patient on the gurney turned his head and looked at Emma. And then he said something that no one in that trauma bay, not Peters, not the nurses, not the respiratory tech, not Harlan Reed himself, was prepared for. He said it quietly. He said it with absolute certainty, and with something underneath that certainty that sounded, incredibly, like relief. "Death Star," he said. 2 words, a name that wasn't a name, a call sign that belonged to a world none of these people had standing in. The room did not just go quiet, the room froze, as if the air itself had stopped moving. Peters looked up from the supply cart. The nurses exchanged glances that came too fast and contained too many questions. And Harlan Reed, who had not stopped moving since he entered this room, who had been in continuous motion since the moment he walked through those doors with the force of 20 years of institutional authority behind him, Harlan Reed went still. Emma did not look at the patient. She kept her eyes on Reed. But Reed was looking at her now, looking at her differently than he had ever looked at her. The irritation was still there, somewhere, but it was behind something else now, behind something that looked, in the overhead fluorescent light of a trauma bay at 11:47 on a November night, a great deal like the first stirrings of uncertainty. "What did he just say?" Reed said. Emma said nothing. The patient's hand, still gripping the gurney rail, relaxed by another fraction. "Death Star," he said again, his voice running down now, blood loss winning the battle of attrition. "That's her call sign." His eyes found Emma's face one more time. "I know who you are," he said. Emma looked at him then, just for a moment, and whatever passed between them in that look was private and old, and absolutely none of the room's business. Then she looked back at Reed. "Portable chest is here," she said, to no one in particular, in the same clear, even voice she might have used to say, "The lab results are back. Let's get a picture of what we're working with." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The trauma bay held itself in a long, suspended moment, balanced on the impossible weight of two words that had somehow changed everything. Outside, somewhere down the hall, a phone rang 3 times and went to voicemail. Inside, in the space between Emma Calloway and the dying man who knew her real name, the air waited. The 2 words hung in the air of that trauma bay like smoke after a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed wrong. Peters had his hand frozen halfway to a supply drawer and didn't even seem aware of it. The nurses stood with the particular stillness of people who understand, on a cellular level, that they are witnessing something they do not have the context to process. And Harlan Reed, the man who had just physically grabbed a colleague's wrist in front of witnesses and felt nothing about it, stood with his mouth slightly open and his surgical certainty evaporating in real time. "Death Star," the patient said one more time, softer now, the blood loss pulling him under at the edges. His eyes were on Emma. "I know exactly who you are." Reed turned to look at Emma the way a man turns to look at a wall he just found out was load-bearing. Emma did not acknowledge the shift in his attention. She was checking the IV flow rate, her fingers moving with the calm precision of someone who had decided that the only thing that mattered in this moment was keeping this man's blood pressure from dropping another 5 points. Whatever the 2 words had done to the room, whatever seismic thing had just moved beneath the floor of everyone's understanding, Emma had set it aside, filed it. She would deal with it when the patient was stable enough for her to have the bandwidth. "His pressure is 80/50, she said to Peters. "Push the 2nd unit. And I need a warm blanket. He's shunting heat." Peters moved. Immediately. Without looking at Reed for permission, which was something Peters had never done in the 8 months he'd been at Mercy General, and which registered in the room as its own small, seismic event. Reed found his voice. "Calloway." "Not right now," Emma said. The room inhaled. Nobody said, "Not right now," to Harlan Reed. Not in this building. Not ever. A first-year resident who had once said something that could be loosely interpreted as mild disagreement with one of Reed's post-surgical assessments had been reassigned to a clinic in another county within 3 weeks. The institutional memory of this place ran deep, and that memory said that when Reed spoke, you answered, and you answered carefully, and you answered fast. Emma did not answer. Emma was adjusting the pressure dressing on the abdominal wound closest to the midline, her hands working with an efficiency that suggested she had done this, or something very much like this, in conditions considerably less controlled than a fully equipped American trauma bay. "You cannot just," Reed started. "Peters," Emma said, not to Reed, through Reed, as if he were furniture. "I need you to call the blood bank and get me 2 more units of O-neg on standby. And page whoever's on for vascular tonight, because that 2nd wound has got a trajectory I don't love." Peters was already at the phone. Reed took a step toward the bed. His jaw was set in a way that said he had made a decision, that the decision was surgical intervention, and that he had already classified every obstacle between himself and that intervention as something to be removed. Emma looked up from the wound and met his eyes. 1 second, clean and direct. "If you touch him without consent," she said, "I will have a patient rights advocate and a hospital attorney in this bay before your gloves are on. He is conscious. He has refused. You know what that means. He is going to die, Reed said. The words came out with genuine force, with something that might have been actual medical urgency, because regardless of everything else Harlan Reed was, he was also a surgeon who had spent decades fighting death on this exact kind of terrain. 3 wounds, 2 potentially crossing the superior mesenteric. His pressure is crashing. You are watching a man bleed out and calling it patient rights. I'm watching a man who has told us what he wants, Emma said, and doing my job within those parameters. Your job, Reed said, and there was a whole history in those 2 words. Every dismissal and every public correction, and every time he had used the difference in their titles as a weapon, is to follow physician orders. Emma straightened. She was not a tall woman. She had never needed to be. Right now, she said, the physician hasn't given me any orders I can legally execute, so I'm working with what I've got. The patient made a sound, not a word, a sound low and controlled, the kind a person makes when a wave of pain crests and they refuse to give it more than that. Emma's attention went back to him immediately. Hey, she said. Her voice changed when she spoke to him. Not softer exactly, just different, more direct. The gentleness in it was not performed, it was functional. I need you to stay with me. You hear me? He turned his head toward her. His face was gray, shining with sweat, but his eyes were sharp. Whatever was draining out of him, it hadn't taken the essential thing yet. You're really her, he said. I'm really someone who needs you to stay conscious, Emma said. Everything else can wait. It can't, he said. There are people who... He stopped, coughed once, and the cough cost him something visible. People who know I'm here. People who shot you? His silence was an answer. Okay, Emma said. The word landed flat and tactical. Then we need to move fast. Peters, I need this bay locked. No non-essential personnel, and I want someone on that door. Peters, phone still in hand, looked at Emma, then at Reed, then back at Emma. It was the longest half-second of his professional life. Then he said, Marcus, can you get to the door? Marcus, who had been standing at the edge of the room trying to be invisible, moved to the door without a word. He was a large man. He fit the door well. Reed's voice went very quiet. The quiet was worse than the volume. You are not authorized to lock down a trauma bay. Charge nurse can recommend a bay restriction for patient safety concerns, Emma said. It's in the policy handbook, page 47. You are not the charge nurse. Donna called in sick at 9. I have shift lead. Emma looked at him steadily. Page 47, Dr. Reed. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Peters had ever been inside of. Then, from the gurney, the patient said, She's right. There are at least 2 of them. They'll know where I was taken. Reed turned to look at the patient with an expression that was recalibrating rapidly. The arrogance was still there, but underneath it something new was forming. Something that looked a lot like the beginning of the realization that this situation was not what he had originally assessed it to be. Who are you? Reed said to the patient. The patient looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Emma. Some kind of question in the look. Some kind of asking permission, which was not a thing this man did easily or often. That much was obvious from every line of his body. Emma gave a very small nod. Warrant Officer Daniel Reeves, the patient said. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A pause. DevGru. The words went into the room like stones into deep water. Peters knew the name. Every American who had watched the news in the last 20 years knew the name, even if they only knew it in the oblique way civilians know things about the military, which is to say, they knew the shape of it without knowing the weight. DevGru, SEAL Team 6, the unit that existed in the precise overlap between official military capacity and the kind of operations that didn't get press releases. Reed's mouth closed, opened, closed again. Why are you here? He finally said. Why this hospital? Closest one, Reeves said. His voice was fraying faster now. And because of her. Every eye in the room went to Emma. Emma was changing the pressure dressing, her hands steady. "He's losing pressure faster," she said, not to anyone in particular, to the room, to the situation. "We're running out of time, and I need everyone in here focused. Reed." She said his name like a tool she was picking up and using. "You want to do something useful? Give me your honest read on that second wound. Can we manage it without going in, or are we talking mandatory surgical indication regardless of consent?" It was, Peters realized later, an extraordinary move. She had just asked Reed for his expertise. She had asked him as a peer asks a peer, without deference and without challenge. Just one professional asking another for an honest clinical assessment. She had given him a door out of the standoff that didn't require him to back down, just to redirect. Reed looked at her for a moment, then he moved to the bedside. He looked at the wound. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Medical quiet. The kind that means something is being processed at a very high level. "Mandatory indication," he said. "That trajectory, the bleeding pattern, I don't see a non-surgical path." "Then we have a problem," Emma said, "because he won't consent." "I won't consent to general anesthesia," Reeves said. His voice was down to something just above a whisper, but the precision in it hadn't moved. "Not while there are active threats. I need to stay conscious." "You're not going to stay conscious," Reed said. "Not at this blood pressure." "Then figure something out," Reeves said, "because I am not going under." The three of them stood around that gurney, Emma and Reed and Peters orbiting this bleeding man who was somehow still running the room despite having 3 bullets in him. And the weight of what he was asking settled over all of them at once. It was Emma who spoke first. "Regional block," she said. Reed looked at her. "Epidural regional plus targeted local," she said. "He stays conscious, or close enough. You get surgical access. It's not ideal, but it's possible. The risk is lower than the alternative, which is him bleeding out in the next 12 minutes while we argue about consent." She looked at Reed directly. Something in her look said she knew she was asking him to do something technically demanding and non-standard, and that she was trusting him to be good enough to do it. Which was, Peters thought, perhaps the most sophisticated thing he had ever watched one person do to another. Reed's jaw moved. He looked at Reeves. Reeves was looking at Emma with an expression that was complicated and private and layered with something that went further back than this hospital. "Regional," Reed said finally. "I need anesthesia down here." "Already paged," Emma said. Reed looked at her. "When?" "4 minutes ago, while you were talking." "A beat. 2. "Peters," Reed said, "get a surgical tray set up. Regional configuration." He didn't look at Peters when he said it. He was looking at Emma, and the look on his face was something that none of the people in that room had a word for, because none of them had ever seen it on Harlan Reed's face before. It was the look of a man who was being forced, against every habit of his professional life, to revise his understanding of someone. The next 8 minutes moved like controlled chaos. Anesthesia arrived. The regional block was placed. Reeves bore it with the silence of someone absorbing pain as information. Nothing more. Acknowledging it the way a navigator acknowledges a storm, as a condition to be managed, not an experience to be expressed. Emma was at his side through all of it, monitoring vitals with one eye, in the room with the other. And twice she told someone to move or change position with the flat authority of someone managing a perimeter, not a bedside. Reed worked. And here was the thing about Harlan Reed, the thing that made him complicated in a way that simple villains never are. He was extraordinary at what he did. His hands inside a wound were something close to art. Peters watched him work and understood, not for the first time, why this man's arrogance had been permitted to flourish, unchallenged, for 2 decades. Because on the other side of all that ugliness was genuine, irreplaceable skill. But Emma was watching Reed's hands and she was nodding, fractionally, barely visible, and Peters realized she had known that. She had known exactly what Reed was capable of, and had deliberately put that capability in front of a problem that required it. She had managed him. She had managed the whole situation, from the moment that radio call came in, with a strategic fluency that had nothing to do with nursing school. Reeves was conscious through the first part of the procedure, barely. His eyes were on Emma's face whenever they were open, which was less and less often as the blood pressure stabilized and the sedative component of the block softened his edges. "How do you know her?" Peter said to Reeves quietly, during a moment when Reed was focused deep in the surgical field, and the room had found a strange, temporary rhythm. Reeves turned his head very slowly toward Peter's, his eyes focused on the young resident with the particular attention of a man assessing whether someone is worth answering. "She saved 8 lives, Reeves said. His voice was almost gone. "In a place that doesn't officially exist, on a night that didn't officially happen." He paused. "I was the 9th. Peter stared at him. "She carried me 400 meters, Reeves said. "Under fire. She wouldn't leave me." Another pause, longer. "I weigh 230. The monitor beeped. Emma adjusted the IV without looking at it. "Blood pressure is coming up," she said. "To the room, to the situation." Her voice was level and certain and completely controlled. But Peters, who was now watching her with different eyes, saw her hand move to Reeves's forearm for just a moment. 1 second. Not clinical, not professional, just human. A hand that said, "I'm here," before it moved back to the IV line. Reed looked up from the surgical field. He had heard. Peters could tell from the slight pause in his hands, barely a fraction of a second, that he had heard what Reeves said. He looked at Emma. Emma looked back. No expression that could be read from the outside, just that steady, contained, unreadable quality she always had. Except now it read different. Now it read like depth instead of absence. Reed looked back down at his work. 15 minutes later, the second wound was closed. The third was manageable without further surgical intervention. Reeves was stable, blood pressure climbing toward acceptable, his breathing slow and rhythmic on the supplemental oxygen. The bay was quiet, the operated kind of quiet that comes after a crisis passes, when everyone is still holding the tension in their bodies, and nobody has decided yet that it's safe to let it go. Peters pulled off his gloves and stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Emma. "You knew who he was," he said. Not accusatory, just a statement, looking for confirmation of what he had already worked out. Emma began the inventory of used supplies. "I recognized him." "From where?" She didn't answer that. "The call sign," Peters said. "Death Star. That's your call sign." Emma counted gauze squares. "This patient needs to stay in a restricted bay until I can make some calls." "What kind of calls?" "The kind that are above your clearance level," she said without unkindness. "No offense." Peters looked at her for a long moment. He was 29 years old. He had gone to a good medical school. He had read many things. He thought he understood the world in a reasonably sophisticated way for someone his age. Standing in this trauma bay, looking at Emma Calloway counting gauze squares next to a SEAL Team 6 operator she had apparently carried for 400 meters under fire, he understood, with sudden and total clarity, that his understanding of the world required significant revision. "What are you doing here?" he said. "I mean, really, why this hospital?" Emma set down the last gauze square. She looked at Peters, and for just a moment, just the smallest fraction of a window opening and closing, something moved behind those dark eyes. Something tired and human and complicated. "Same reason anyone's anywhere," she said, "trying to do something useful." The monitor beeped. She checked it, made a small adjustment, and that window, if it had ever been open at all, closed again. Then the bay door opened, not a push, not a nurse coming in for a handoff. A controlled, deliberate opening by someone who had assessed the door before touching it, who had placed themselves to the side of the frame before pushing it, who had entered with their eyes moving in a pattern that had nothing casual in it at all. 2 men, dark jackets, no logos, no badges visible. Both of them scanning the room in that systematic way that some people had and most people never developed because most people had never needed it. One was compact and dark-haired, mid-40s. The other was taller, gray at the temples, with a kind of face that had been weathered by something other than age. They looked at Reeves, they looked at each other, then they looked at Emma. The taller one said one word. Just one word. Quiet and flat. The way you say a word to someone when the word is a confirmation of something you needed confirmed. He said, Shepherd. And Emma Calloway, who had been Emma Calloway for 11 months in this hospital, who had been night shift trauma nurse Emma Calloway with her agency placement and her one duffel bag and her absolutely no personal details, went very still. Not afraid. Something different from afraid, the stillness of someone who had been running a very long race and had just reached the point where the terrain changed. Peters looked at Emma, at the two men, back at Emma. Harlan Reed, who had been stripping off his surgical gown on the far side of the bay, had stopped moving entirely. Shepherd, Emma said quietly. That's right, the taller man said. We need to talk. Outside the locked bay door, somewhere down the corridor, the hospital ran its normal business. Monitors beeped, PA system called codes. The world moved the way it always moved, quickly and without regard for the things happening in the spaces between its official attention. Inside, the distance between who Emma Calloway had been an hour ago and who she was right now had collapsed completely. And nobody in that room, not Peters, not Reed, not Marcus still standing at the door, had any idea yet how far that collapse was going to reach. The taller man's name was Garrett. He didn't offer a last name. He didn't offer a badge. He offered nothing except that one word he'd already used. And the weight of it was apparently sufficient because Emma had straightened in a way that changed her posture entirely. Not stiffer, not more formal, but more present, as if a frequency she had been keeping deliberately low had been turned back up to its operational setting. How did you find this location? Emma said. Reeves had a tracker, Garrett said. Subcutaneous, standard issue for active operators on domestic soil. He glanced at the bed, at Reeves breathing slow and steady under the oxygen mask. Something moved across Garrett's face that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. He's going to make it? If nothing else goes wrong tonight, Emma said, define nothing else. That's what I'd like to hear from you. Garrett looked at the room. He looked at Peters, at Marcus by the door, at Reed, who had not moved from his position by the surgical station, still holding his balled-up gown with both hands, like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Garrett's assessment of each person took approximately 1 second per person, which was either very fast or very thorough, depending on what you knew about how assessments like that worked. We need the room, Garrett said. These people just saved his life, Emma said. They stay. Garrett looked at her. The compact, dark-haired man beside him, who had not spoken yet and whose name Emma had not asked for, shifted his weight slightly. Not aggressively, just a repositioning that said he was paying attention and had opinions about how this went. Shepherd, Garrett said again, and this time the word had more in it. A history, a context, an entire set of prior conversations compressed into 2 syllables. Don't, Emma said, quiet, flat, final. Don't use that name in here like it's a leash. I haven't been Shepherd for 11 months. I'm Emma Calloway. I work nights, and if you want my cooperation, which it looks like you need, you will tell me what is happening right now in plain language in front of these people. Peters was holding his breath. He became aware of this and carefully started breathing again. Garrett studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair from the wall, turned it around, sat on it backwards with his forearms on the back of it, and said, Reeves was running a ghost op, off book. 6 weeks ago, he picked up credible intelligence on a domestic acquisition network, people moving restricted military hardware out of secured facilities and selling it to private buyers. Not foreign state actors, domestic, private money. The room was absolutely quiet. He was 3 days from a handoff point when someone burned his cover, Garrett continued. Whoever shot him tonight knew exactly where he was and exactly what he was carrying. He paused. Which means there's a leak inside the unit or inside the chain above the unit. How far up? Emma said. Far enough that Reeves didn't trust anyone in the official structure, which is why... Garrett stopped. Which is why he came here, Emma said, not a question. He'd been tracking your placement for 2 months. He knew where you were. Emma's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. He used this hospital as a dead drop. He used you, Garrett said, because you're the only person on the list he was carrying that he trusted completely. His words, not mine. Another pause. The list he was carrying, Shepard, it has names on it. 11 names. People inside the military acquisition structure who are part of this network. One of those names is someone you know. Emma went very still. Peters watched her go still and understood instinctively that this was different from her usual stillness. Her usual stillness was controlled and professional. This was the stillness of someone absorbing a blow they had not seen coming and refusing to show the impact. Who? Emma said. Garrett said a name. He said it quietly enough that Peters didn't catch it. And from the way Garrett said it, quietly, indirectly, and while watching Emma's face with careful attention, he understood it wasn't meant for the room. It was meant for Emma alone. Whatever the name was, it hit. Emma's jaw set in a way it hadn't set all night. Through the confrontation with Reed, through the regional block, through all of it. This was different. This was personal in a way that the rest hadn't been. And the fact that she contained it as completely as she did told Peters more about who this woman was than anything else he'd witnessed in the last hour. You're sure, Emma said. Reeves was sure. And Reeves is, Garrett looked at the bed. He's the most careful operator I've ever worked with. Then why is he lying on that table with 3 bullets in him? Garrett didn't answer that immediately. The compact man beside him shifted his weight again. Emma looked at the compact man directly for the first time. You haven't said anything, she said to him. I'm listening, the compact man said. His voice was younger than his posture suggested. Late 30s, maybe. He had eyes that were calibrated for something specific. Who are you? Fallon, he said. Emma processed the name. Something changed. You're the one who flagged the leak. Fallon nodded once. 3 weeks ago, you filed an internal report. That nobody acted on, Fallon said. Right. And now Reeves is here and the leak is still active. And whoever burned him tonight knows he's alive because the ambulance radio is not encrypted and this hospital's intake system uploads to a shared regional database that... Emma stopped, turned to Peters. When Reeves came in, intake logged his arrival? Peters felt the floor shift under him slightly. Standard protocol, the system auto-uploads every 20 minutes. What time did he come in? 11:47. Emma looked at the clock on the wall. It's 12:19. Garrett stood up from the chair. Fast. The casual position was gone entirely. The upload already went, Emma said. They know he's here. They know he survived the shooting, and they know exactly which hospital he's in. She looked at Garrett. How long? Garrett was already moving toward the door, speaking into something at his collar that Peters hadn't noticed before. Fallon, lock the floor. Get me eyes on the parking structure and the south entrance. He looked at Emma. We need to move him. He's post-surgical, Reed said. Everyone looked at Reed. Reed had apparently been so thoroughly processed out of the conversation by events that the sound of his own voice seemed to mildly surprise him. But he held his ground. His eyes were on the bed, on Reeves, and they had the quality they got when he was in clinical mode rather than political mode. The quality that had kept people coming back to this hospital's trauma wing for 20 years. He's 40 minutes out of surgery, Reed said, Moving him carries a real risk of reopening the vascular repair. If that anastomosis gives way outside this bay, in a hallway, in an elevator, without the right equipment immediately available, he bleeds out before anyone can do anything about it. Garrett looked at Reed. For the first time since entering the bay, he looked at Reed as a relevant variable rather than an obstacle or background noise. "What's the window?" Garrett said. Not dismissive, operational. 12 hours minimum before I'd sign off on any kind of transport, Reed said. 6 hours, absolute bare minimum, if your alternative is a certainty of something worse. Then we hold here, Emma said, and we harden this position. Garrett turned to her. "Shepard." "Emma," she said, clean and firm. "And yes, I understand what I'm saying. We cannot move him safely. We cannot trust the official security structure because you just told me the leak goes high enough to burn a DevGru operator. So we hold here. We control the access points, and we figure out who's coming, and we make sure we're ready before they arrive." Marcus at the door said very quietly, "I'm sorry, are we talking about someone coming here? To this hospital? To finish the job?" Nobody answered him, which was itself an answer. Marcus turned to face the door more squarely and put both hands on his hips and said, "Okay," in the tone of a man who has decided that tonight is a night requiring exceptional commitment. Peters looked at Emma. "What do you need from me?" Emma looked at him. The look was quick and assessing, and when it was done, it had the quality of a decision made. "I need you to go to the nurses' station and pull up every camera feed this floor has access to. Don't explain why. Just do it and stay on it. And if you see anyone you don't recognize moving toward this bay, you call me directly. Not the desk. Me." Peters nodded. He was out the door in 5 seconds. Garrett was already on his second communication when Reeves, from the bed, said, "Garrett." Everyone stopped. Reeves had his eyes open. Not fully, halfway. The oxygen mask muffled his voice, but not enough to make it unclear. He was running on something that went past physiology, past what blood pressure and sedation and surgery should have permitted. Some fuel source that the men and women who did what he did for a living cultivated over years, because there were always moments when the body's official resource allocation was insufficient. "The list," Reeves said, "left side, under the padding." Garrett moved to the bed immediately. His hands went to the left side of the gurney, under the thin mattress padding, and found what he was looking for. A flat, hard object the size of a credit card, wrapped in what appeared to be medical tape. The kind of tape that was in every trauma bay in every hospital. The kind nobody would look twice at. Garrett held it up, looked at Emma. "I needed a place nobody would search a patient," Reeves said. His eyes moved to Emma, "and I needed a nurse I trusted, not to find it before I could explain." Emma looked at the object in Garrett's hand. "What is it?" "Encrypted drive," Fallon said. He was already moving toward Garrett. 11 names and 3 months of documentation. Acquisition records, financial transfers, communication intercepts. He paused. "And a recording." "Of what?" Emma said. Fallon looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Emma. The look said something that the words were apparently not ready to say yet. "Of what?" Emma said again, and this time the words had an edge under them that had not been there before. "A meeting," Garrett said. 4 weeks ago. 3 of the 11 names in a room together, discussing what to do about Reeves. By name. With specifics." He paused. "And discussing what to do about you." The bay was quiet enough that the ventilation system was audible. "They knew about me," Emma said. It wasn't a question. "Someone told them you were the fallback," Garrett said. "Someone who knew your placement here. Someone who knew your operational history." He stopped. "Someone who knew both of you." Emma absorbed this. Peters would have missed the moment if he hadn't been watching for exactly this kind of moment. The fraction of a second where something internal broke, or bent, or restructured, and then the fraction of a second after it where it was already being managed. Emma had that sequence down to a biology. Break, contain, move forward. Break, contain, move forward. Like breathing. The name you told me, Emma said to Garrett. He's on the recording? He's running the meeting, Garrett said. Emma turned away from the room. She faced the wall for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of privacy in the middle of a trauma bay full of people. Then she turned back. Okay, she said. Reed, who had been watching all of this with the expression of a man who had arrived at a party expecting a surgical consultation and found himself inside a classified operation, said carefully, "Someone want to tell me what the practical situation is? In terms of this hospital and the people in it? Because I have a trauma wing full of patients and a staff that doesn't know." "How many exits on this floor?" Emma said to him. Reed blinked. 4, 2 stairwells, the main elevator bank, and the service elevator at the north end. "Who has access to the service elevator after midnight?" "Facility staff, and OR transport when they're moving post-surgical patients." Emma looked at Garrett. Garrett spoke into his collar again. Then he said, "I've got one man I can put on the main elevator. Fallon takes the south stairwell. That leaves the north stairwell and the service elevator." "I have the north stairwell," Emma said. "You're a nurse," Garrett said. Emma looked at him with an expression that caused Garrett, who was not a man who recalibrated easily or often, to close his mouth on whatever he'd been about to say next. "Right," Garrett said. "North stairwell." Reed said, "I'll take the service elevator." Emma looked at him. The look lasted 2 full seconds. "You don't have to do that." "I'm aware," Reed said. He said it stiffly, with the particular stiffness of a man doing something that his pride found expensive. He picked up his phone from the surgical station. "What am I looking for?" "Anyone who doesn't belong on this floor," Emma said. "You'll know. It's your floor." Reed nodded once, sharply, and walked out without another word. Peter's voice came through Emma's radio, the hospital radio she'd had clipped to her scrubs all night. "Emma, I've got 2 vehicles in the parking structure, lower level, lights off. They've been there since 12:03. They didn't come from the ER entrance." Emma looked at Garrett. 12:03, Garrett said, 16 minutes after the database upload. "They're already here," Fallon said. "They were already close," Emma said. "They were following Reeves before he got to the hospital. They've been waiting to confirm he survived." She looked at the drive in Garrett's hand. "They know what's on it." "Which means they're not coming to finish a job," Garrett said. "They're coming to retrieve it," Emma said. The difference between those 2 things settled over the room with considerable weight. A team that wanted Reeves dead would come in hot, fast, loud, counting on shock and speed. A team that wanted the drive would come in quiet, controlled, looking for minimum exposure. They would move like professionals. They would move like people who knew what they were doing. They would move like the kind of people Emma used to be. "How many?" Emma said. "Minimum team for this kind of retrieval," Garrett said, "is 4. 2 on the floor, 2 outside as extract." "2 on the floor," Emma repeated. "1 for the target, 1 for interference." "And we have 1 man on the elevator and 1 on the south stairwell," Fallon said. "And you on the north. And whatever I am on the service elevator," Reed's voice said over the radio. He'd apparently been listening. His voice had a quality in it that was difficult to name. Not frightened exactly. Something more like a man discovering that the building he'd been living in had rooms he hadn't known about. "Peters," Emma said into the radio, "those vehicles move. You tell me immediately. You see anyone come through any entrance that isn't staff you already know, you tell me immediately. Can you do that?" "Already on it," Peters said. Emma looked at Reeves. His eyes were open again, watching her. The oxygen mask rose and fell with his breathing. The monitors were steady. Everything that could be controlled had been controlled. "You should have told me," Emma said to him, quiet enough that it was between them. "You would have run," he said. "I've been running for 11 months. "I know." His eyes held hers. "That's why I didn't tell you." A pause. the length of several heartbeats. You were done, Shepard. You were out. You were clean. I watched you build this. He moved his hands slightly, indicating something that meant the hospital, the life, the 11 months of Emma Calloway. And it was good. It was real. I wasn't going to walk in here and take that from you unless there was no other way. Emma looked at him for a long time. Is there another way? She said. Not anymore, he said. Emma looked down, just for a moment. Then she looked back up and her face had the quality it always had, clear and present and fully inhabited, and she said, then we finish it. The radio crackled. Emma, Peter's voice was different, tighter. South vehicle just moved. It's coming around to the ambulance entrance. Fallon was already moving. North vehicle? Emma said, still parked. A pause. Wait, someone just got out. Walking toward the main entrance. One person, moving fast, one visible, Garrett said, looking at Emma. Which means, the other one's already inside, Emma said. She was moving before she finished the sentence. The north stairwell door was 20 meters from the trauma bay. Emma covered them in the way she covered every space she moved through, efficiently and without wasted motion, and with the kind of peripheral awareness that turned a hallway into a series of angles and positions and threat assessments. She had her hospital radio in her left hand and nothing in her right hand, and the nothing in her right hand said everything about who she was and where she came from, and what 11 months of emergency nursing had and had not changed about her. She pushed through the stairwell door. The stairwell was quiet. For 3 seconds it was quiet. Then, from below her, from the landing between floors, she heard the specific sound of someone moving who was trying not to be heard moving, and who was very good at it, and who was not quite good enough. Emma looked down through the stairwell gap, a shape moving up, dark clothing, controlled movement, one hand on the rail, one hand at the side, and the hand at the side was not empty. Emma pressed herself against the wall and brought the radio up. Garrett, she said, barely above a whisper. North stairwell, 1, between floors, armed, coming up. Copy, Garrett said. Fallon has the second at the south entrance. I'm en route to you. 30 seconds. 30 seconds, Emma thought, was a very long time in a stairwell. The shape below her kept moving up. Emma looked at the radio in her left hand, at the empty right hand, at the door to the trauma floor behind her, behind which Daniel Reeves was breathing on a ventilator, and the drive was in Garrett's jacket, and the 11 names were intact, and the recording was intact, and 11 months of building something clean and real and genuinely hers was balanced on the next 30 seconds. She stepped away from the wall. She moved to the center of the landing, and she waited. The shape came up one more flight and stopped. They looked at each other across 8 feet of institutional stairwell light. The person below was male, compact, 30s, with the face of someone who had done this particular kind of work long enough that surprise was something that happened to other people. But he was surprised now, not by her position, not by being found. He was surprised by her face, by the recognition moving across his own face as he placed her, as the name caught up with the person, as Death Star resolved from myth into a woman in light blue scrubs holding a hospital radio. Shepard, he said, and Emma said, wrong floor. Garrett told her everything, standing in the doorway of Trauma Bay 12 at 1 o'clock in the morning while the hospital ran its quiet overnight business around them, and nobody outside that room had any idea that the information being delivered was the kind that restructured a person's entire understanding of the last 18 months of their life. His name was Colonel Victor Shale. That was the name. The name Garrett had said quietly in the trauma bay. The name on the recording. The name Harris had confirmed while sitting in a restricted corridor with Fallon's full and undivided attention. Colonel Victor Shale, who had spent 31 years in naval special warfare, who had more commendations than most officers saw in 2 careers, who had personally signed Emma's exit paperwork when she requested out of the unit 18 months ago, who had sat across a desk from her in a secure room in Virginia and told her she'd earned her rest, that her service had been exceptional, that she was free to go build something quiet and real. He had looked her in the eyes and said those things. And then, according to Harris, according to the recording on the drive, he had made 2 phone calls within the hour. The first was to the agency that handled placement for operatives transitioning to civilian cover. The second was to a private number that did not appear in any official directory and that belonged to the network Reeves had spent 3 months documenting. He had not let her go. He had repositioned her. Emma stood with this information for 30 seconds without speaking. Peters watched her absorb it with the focused attention of someone who had come to understand that watching Emma process difficult information was one of the most instructive things he had ever witnessed. Because she did not perform the processing. She did not give it to the room. She held it entirely inside herself, turned it over, looked at every face of it, and then she came back. He put me here, Emma said, because this hospital is in the coverage radius of the acquisition network's primary distribution route. She said it the way she said clinical findings, not as a wound, as a fact. He wanted a pair of eyes here that he controlled, someone trained, someone invisible, someone with no official connection to any active operation. That's Harris's read, Garrett said, and mine. He didn't think I'd ever know, Emma said. No, Garrett said. He thought you were done. He thought you'd work your shifts and live your life and never have cause to look at anything sideways. A pause. He didn't account for Reeves. Nobody ever accounts for Reeves, Emma said. On the bed, Reeves made a sound that in a different version of the night would have been a laugh. Emma turned to look at him. He was watching her with the careful attention of a man who understood he had, by surviving, detonated something in the life of the person who saved him, and who was carrying that weight with the honesty it deserved. You knew about Shale when you came in, Emma said to him. Suspected, Reeves said. His voice was stronger now, the blood pressure holding, the color coming back in increments. The leak had characteristics, the way the cover burns happened. Too clean, too targeted, someone with access to personnel movement and operational scheduling above the unit level. He paused. I started looking at Shale 6 weeks ago. The financial trail took another 3 weeks to build out. By the time I had enough to be certain, I was already burned. So you came here, Emma said. I came here because the drive needed to go somewhere Shale couldn't reach it, Reeves said. And because you were the only person I trusted who was outside his direct chain. I was under his placement, Emma said. You were outside his chain, Reeves said. There's a difference. He put you here as an asset, but assets don't know they're assets, which means you had no obligation to him, no structure he could trigger. He couldn't call you and tell you to interfere without revealing what he'd done. You were free in the one way he didn't intend. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's a very narrow margin. I know, Reeves said. It was the only one available. Reed had been standing against the wall through all of this, with the expression of a man who had walked into a foreign country without a map and was managing the experience with stubborn competence. He cleared his throat. This Shale, Reed said. Where is he right now? Garrett looked at Reed. That's the problem, Garrett said. We don't know. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees that had nothing to do with the ventilation. Explain that, Emma said. Harris's last confirmed contact with Shale was at 11:15 tonight, Garrett said. 45 minutes before Reeves came in. After that, Shale went dark. No location on his personal device, no activity on his official accounts, no response from his aide. Garrett's jaw was set in the way of someone delivering information they wished they were delivering differently. He knows Harris is compromised. He knows the operation failed, and he knows the drive exists and is no longer in his control. He's running, Fallon said from the doorway. Maybe, Garrett said, or he's not done. Emma looked at Garrett. What does that mean? Garrett was quiet for exactly the length of time it took him to decide whether the next sentence was survivable. It means that a man like Shale, 31 years, that kind of institutional access, the kind of network he's been running for 6 years, he doesn't just run. Running is an admission. Running is the end of everything he built. Garrett paused. He's more likely to try to control the narrative, get ahead of the drive, discredit the source, or eliminate it. The word eliminate sat in the room with considerable physical presence. Peter said, "He'd come here himself?" "He'd send someone we haven't identified," Garrett said. "Someone not connected to Harris or the 4 we already have. A clean asset. Someone outside the documented network." Emma looked at the door, at the corridor beyond it, at the hospital around them with its nighttime reduced staff, and its sleeping patients, and its camera feeds, and its 4 entrances, and its assumption of its own safety. She looked at Reeves. "The recording on the drive," she said. "How clear is it?" "Clear enough," Reeves said. "Voice confirmed, context explicit. 3 of the 11 names, including Shale, discussing the operation by name. Discussing your name. Discussing what to do if the drive reached official channels." He met her eyes. "It's enough. It's more than enough. The right hands. It ends Shale's career and his freedom in the same motion." "So we need to get it to the right hands," Emma said. "Tonight, now, before he moves." "Who are the right hands?" Peter said. "If the leak goes as high as—" "Inspector General's office," Garrett said. DODIG. Independent oversight. Shale has no access to that structure. How long to reach them? "I have a direct contact," Garrett said. "I can have someone in this building within 2 hours who has the authority to take custody of the drive and initiate a formal investigation that Shale cannot touch." 2 hours, Emma said. 2 hours, Garrett confirmed. "Then we hold for 2 hours, Emma said. She said it the way she said everything, clean and flat and without audible doubt. The way of someone who had learned that doubt was a resource to be spent privately so that the room could use your certainty. Peters nodded. Marcus, who had returned from the door of the bay and was standing in the corner in the particular way of a man who had committed fully to something he hadn't entirely understood when he committed, nodded too. Reed said nothing, but his posture said yes. Garrett stepped out to make the call. Fallon stayed in the doorway. Emma turned back to the bay and began doing what she did, checking vitals, adjusting the IV rate, reading the monitors with the automatic fluency of someone for whom the body's data language had become a second native tongue. For 18 minutes, the floor was quiet. Then Peter said, "Emma." His voice had a quality she knew from the last 3 hours, the tight, careful quality of someone who had found something they needed to deliver, without causing a reaction that made the situation worse. She turned from the IV stand. Peters had his phone in his hand. He held it out to her. On the screen was an email notification. A hospital administration email sent from the chief of medicine's office, time-stamped 4 minutes ago at 1:22 in the morning. Emma read it. She read it again. Then she handed the phone back to Peters and said, "Get Garrett." Peters got Garrett. Garrett read the email. His expression went through the same rapid sequence Emma's had gone through, compressed and controlled, and then he looked at Emma. He has access to hospital administration. Shale was on the board of a private healthcare investment group that held partial stake in this hospital's parent company until 2 years ago, Emma said. "I know because Donna mentioned it once. Board restructuring. She thought it was boring paperwork. I thought it was boring paperwork." Her jaw tightened. It wasn't boring paperwork. "What does the email say?" Reeves said from the bed. Emma looked at him. "It's a directive from the chief of medicine ordering the immediate transfer of an unidentified trauma patient from Restricted Bay 12 to a private facility for continued care, citing patient safety concerns and a request from next of kin." She paused. "It's signed and time-stamped. It has my badge number on it as the attending nurse of record." Your badge number, Reeves said. Making it look like I requested the transfer, Emma said, which means if I resist it, I'm resisting a directive that appears to have originated with me. And if I comply, he moves, Garrett said. He's already in a vehicle, Emma said, outside this hospital, waiting for the transfer order to push Reeves out of this bay and into an ambulance. Once he's in transit, she didn't finish the sentence. The end of the sentence was available to everyone in the room. Reed moved from the wall. I'm the chief of trauma surgery, he said. Patient care decisions in this wing go through me, not administration. A transfer order for a post-surgical patient in the first hour of recovery requires my sign-off, and I am not signing anything. He said it with the full weight of 20 years of institutional authority. And for the first time since Emma had known him, that authority was pointed in exactly the right direction. Nobody moves this patient without my written authorization. That's policy, page 11. Emma looked at Reed. Reed looked back at her. His expression said nothing except that he had made a decision, and it was not reversible, and he understood perfectly what it might cost him. And he had done the arithmetic, and here they were. Page 11, Emma said. I know my own handbook, Reed said. Garrett was already on his phone. I'm pushing the timeline, he said. IG contact, I need you here in 60 minutes, not 2 hours. He walked out of the bay. Emma went to the nurse's station. Peters followed her. She pulled up the hospital directory on the desk terminal, and she found the chief of medicine's personal line, and she called it, and it rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called the on-call administrator line. A night administrator named Gregory answered on the second ring in the voice of a man who had been asleep. This is Emma Calloway, shift lead, trauma wing, Emma said. I need you to pull a directive that came through the chief of medicine's email account in the last 10 minutes. Transfer order for Bay 12. Gregory was awake now. I don't have authorization to pull a directive from... The directive contains my badge number as originating requester, Emma said. I did not send that request. Someone accessed the chief of medicine's account without authorization and used my credentials to generate a fraudulent transfer order for a patient who is 40 minutes post-surgery. If that order executes, this hospital is liable for the outcome. She paused. Pull it, right now, and get me the chief of medicine's personal cell number because he needs to know his email account has been compromised. A silence that lasted about 3 seconds. Then Gregory said, Hold on. Emma held. Peters stood beside her watching the camera feeds. There's a vehicle on the south side, he said quietly. Non-hospital. It's been there for 8 minutes. Just one, Emma said. Just one visible, Peters said. The distinction was not lost on either of them. Gregory came back on the line. I've suspended the transfer order pending verification. I'm calling Dr. Marsh now. He paused. Miss Calloway, I have to ask. Ask tomorrow, Emma said. Tonight, just make the calls. She hung up. She stood at the nurse's station for a moment. The camera feeds on Peter's screen showed the floor, the entrances, the parking area visible on the south camera. The vehicle Peters had flagged was a dark SUV, no plates visible at the current angle. It had not moved. Garrett, Emma said into her radio. Copy, Garrett said. He was somewhere on the floor, his voice low. South side, single vehicle, non-hospital. I see it, Garrett said. It's clean, registered to a rental company, picked up at Dulles at 7 this evening. A pause. 3 hours before Reeves was shot. Emma absorbed that. He was already moving before the shooting. This wasn't reactive, Garrett said. He planned for the possibility that Reeves survived. He had the transfer order ready, the vehicle ready, the administrative access ready. Another pause. This is a man who plans for contingencies the way you and I breathe. I know, Emma said. I worked for him for 6 years. The weight of that sentence landed in the nurse's station with complete fullness. Peters heard it and understood something new about the look, that had been behind Emma's eyes every time the name came up. The look she worked so hard to keep out of her face. 6 years. She had been close enough to this man for 6 years to admire his competence, to trust his judgment, to accept his assessment of her own service, to take his word for what she had earned. The betrayal wasn't just operational. It was intimate in the way that betrayals by people you have genuinely respected are always intimate. "Emma," Peter said. He kept his voice low. "Are you okay?" Emma looked at him. The question seemed to land on her from an unexpected angle, like a hand placed on a shoulder she'd forgotten was tense. "Ask me in 2 hours," she said. Peters nodded. He wasn't going to push it. He had learned enough tonight to understand that Emma Calloway operated in a register of self-sufficiency that most people never approached. That asking her if she was okay was something you could do once, gently, and then you stepped back and you trusted her to manage what she said she could manage. At 1:51 in the morning, Reeves' monitor alarmed. Not critically, not the alarm of a catastrophic event. The alarm of a blood pressure reading that had dropped from acceptable to concerning in the space of about 4 minutes. The kind of drop that said something was stressing the surgical repair, something internal and invisible, and entirely consistent with a patient who had been doing too much with the conscious energy he had left. Emma was in the bay before the second alarm cycle. Reed was 2 steps behind her. "He's been talking," Reed said. "Too much for his condition." "Reeves," Emma said, "I need you to stop thinking and start resting. Right now. Whatever you're working through in your head, it can wait." "Can't," Reeves said. His voice was thinner than it had been 20 minutes ago. "There's something I didn't tell Garrett." Emma checked the monitor. The pressure was holding, not climbing back yet. "Say it fast," she said. "The recording," Reeves said. 3 names in the room. Shale and 2 others. He paused, and the pause cost him something. "One of the 2 others is someone in this hospital." The room stopped. Reed made a sound that was not quite a word. "Someone in this hospital," Emma said, flat, careful. "On staff?" "Not staff," Reeves said. "Administration. The investment connection you mentioned. 2 years ago when they restructured the board. One name stayed on in an advisory capacity. Unofficial. Off the public record." He looked at her. "He's here tonight, Shepard. Shale didn't come himself because he didn't need to. He has someone already inside." Emma looked at Reed. Reed was already looking at her with the expression of a man running a list of every person with administrative access who had reason to be in this building tonight. "The chief of medicine," Emma said. "No," Reeves said. "Think smaller. Think who has access to administrative systems and moves through this building at night without anyone questioning it," Emma thought. She ran the building the way she'd run it every night for 11 months, the way she'd learned to run every space she inhabited, as a series of patterns and permissions and presences. She thought about who moved and where and when, and what access required what credentials, and who provided what cover. And then she thought about who had told her about the board restructuring, who had mentioned it casually, who had been at Mercy General for 23 years, who had the scheduling authority of a charge nurse and the systemic access that came with it, who had, tonight, called in sick at 9 o'clock, conveniently vacating the shift lead position and leaving Emma in charge of a floor she had been on for 11 months, in a position she had never held before, with authority she hadn't known she'd have, who had sent a cup of coffee across a counter without comment and watched all of it from the beginning. Emma looked at the door. "Where's Donna?" she said. Peters turned to his camera feeds immediately. His hands moved across the keyboard, pulling up one angle, then another, then a third. His face changed. "She's here," Peters said. "She came in at midnight. She's been in the administrative office on the 2nd floor for the last 40 minutes. Emma was already moving. She was out the bay door and into the corridor before Reed had fully processed the information, moving in that particular way of hers that covered ground without performing urgency, smooth and direct and completely without hesitation. Garrett's voice on the radio. "Emma, what's happening?" "Second floor administrative office," Emma said. "Now." "Copy," Garrett said. No questions. That was the operational fluency of two people who had, in the space of a single night, rebuilt a working trust from the ground up. The stairwell door. The stairs. Emma went down fast, her hand barely touching the rail, her mind running ahead to the second floor and what she was going to find there and how she was going to handle the finding. She thought about Donna. 23 years, reading glasses on the forehead, coffee cups slid across counters, the specific warmth of a woman who had seemed, in every interaction Emma had filed away over 11 months, to be genuinely decent. Seemed. The second floor corridor, the administrative office at the end, the light under the door that matched the light under every door Emma had walked toward tonight. She went to it and she knocked once, clearly, without disguising the knock as anything except what it was, a statement that she was there, and she knew, and the time for the other version of this night was over. "Come in," Donna said. Emma opened the door. Donna was sitting at the administrator's desk with a laptop open and a phone in her hand, and the expression of a woman who had been caught mid-sentence by a situation she had not fully calculated. The reading glasses were on her forehead as always. She looked exactly like Donna. She looked completely like the person Emma had known. And that was the particular cruelty of it, that the face of it didn't change. That people who did this kind of thing got to keep wearing the face of the person they had been before. "Emma," Donna said. Her voice was careful, not frightened. Careful in the way of someone assessing how much had been understood and how much remained negotiable. "Put the phone down, Donna," Emma said. Donna put the phone down. Her eyes moved once to the door behind Emma, measuring, then came back. "How much do you know?" "Enough," Emma said. "Then you know it's not what it looks like," Donna said. "I was placed here before you were, long before you were. I never touched a patient. I never interfered with care. You only ever passed information," Emma said. "Scheduling, staffing, patient intake. When critical cases came in, what the intake logs showed." Donna's jaw tightened. "It wasn't. You called in sick tonight," Emma said. "At 9 o'clock, after Shale knew Reeves was going to move. You cleared the shift lead position so I'd be holding authority I didn't know how to use in a situation I didn't know was coming." Emma's voice did not rise. It did not change texture or temperature. "And when the transfer order went through tonight, you were going to make sure it executed before I understood what it was." Donna looked at her for a long moment. The expression on her face was complicated in a way that was, Emma thought, probably genuine. The complication of someone who had compartmentalized for a very long time and was now sitting in a room where the compartments had all opened simultaneously. "He said you were an operative," Donna said. "When they placed you, he said you were here on an active assignment, that you were dangerous and I needed to keep eyes on you." Her voice had something in it that was almost defensive, almost the voice of someone who had told themselves a story that had worked until it didn't. "He said the hospital needed to be protected from you." The silence after that was the longest silence of the night. Emma looked at Donna. At 23 years of that face, in those reading glasses, in those wordless cups of coffee, in the particular safety Emma had felt in this building, that she now understood had never been entirely accidental, because Donna had been watching her and managing her environment with the practiced subtlety of someone who had been doing exactly this for a very long time. Garrett appeared in the doorway. He took in the room in 1 second. He looked at Emma. "She's going to tell us everything," Emma said. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise. It was the flat certainty of someone who had run out of the version of the night where things were still unclear. Donna looked at Emma. Then she looked at the laptop. Then she looked at her hands. Something in her face did what things did when a long project finally, irrevocably ended. It loosened. It let go. His real contact number, Donna said. The one he uses when he doesn't want any record. I have it. Garrett moved into the room. Write it down, he said. Donna wrote it down. Outside, somewhere in the building, the hospital was still running. Patients still breathing. Monitors still beeping. The ordinary heroism of nighttime medicine continuing in every bay and room and corridor that was not this one. Peters was upstairs watching his camera feeds. Marcus was at a door. Reed was with a man who had 3 bullets removed from his body and was stable and breathing and alive because a woman in light blue scrubs had stood her ground at a gurney rail and said the words she needed to say in the tone she needed to say them. And in an administrative office on the 2nd floor, Garrett was making a phone call with a number that was not supposed to exist, to reach a man who had believed he had covered every exit. Emma stood in the corridor outside the office door and let herself have the 3 seconds. The wall was not available, so she used the air. She breathed. She looked at the ceiling. She counted to 3. Shale had built this, had architected her placement here with the precision he applied to everything, using her trust, using her competence, using the genuine relief she had felt at being let go as the most effective possible cover. She had been his instrument in a building she believed was hers, and the instrument had broken along exactly the fault line he had forgotten to account for. The drive existed, 11 names, a recording, Harris in custody, 4 operators contained, Donna writing down a number, Reeves alive. Emma breathed out. She touched her badge. Emma Calloway, night shift trauma nurse, the name she had chosen, the life she had built, the thing that was real, regardless of who had positioned it or why, because she had filled it with 11 months of genuine work and genuine care and the kind of daily small heroism that did not come with call signs or classifications, but that saved lives just the same. She touched the badge and she thought, this is mine. Whatever else is true tonight, this is mine. Her radio crackled. Peters. Emma. There's a car pulling into the north entrance. Black sedan, government plates. Emma looked at her watch. 2:14 in the morning. That's the IG contact, Garrett said from inside the office. 44 minutes. Tell them Bay 12. Emma keyed the radio. Peters, meet them at the north entrance. Bring them to Bay 12. Nobody else comes up with them. Copy, Peters said. Emma stood in the corridor for one more moment. The drive was in Garrett's jacket. The names were intact. The recording was intact. Then she straightened her scrubs, clipped her badge, and walked back toward the stairs. She had a patient to check on, and an IV rate to verify, and a blood pressure she needed to see climbing back to where she wanted it. And 44 minutes had turned into right now, and right now was the only time that had ever mattered. The 2 people who came through the north entrance at 2:14 in the morning did not look like the kind of people who changed the outcome of things. That was, Peters understood as he walked them to the elevator, entirely intentional. The woman was 50-ish, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that processed information without advertising the processing. The man beside her was younger, carried a bag that clinked slightly when it moved, and had the demeanor of someone who had been woken from sleep and had made peace with that on the drive over. They showed Peters credentials that he looked at carefully and understood only partially, and which were, he was fairly certain, the most serious pieces of identification he had ever held in his hands. The woman's name was Special Agent Diana Cho, Department of Defense Inspector General. She said it once, clearly, and did not repeat it. Bay 12, Peters said. This way. She looked at him as they walked. You're the resident who was first on the patient. Yes. You've been here the whole time. Yes. She looked at him with the assessing attention of someone who filed people accurately and permanently on first meeting. Good, she said. It was a complete sentence. Emma was in Bay 12 when they arrived. She had Reeves' blood pressure back up to 100/65, and she had the IV rate adjusted, and she had done 3 other small, precise things that Reed watched and did not comment on because he had arrived somewhere in the last 2 hours where commenting on Emma's clinical decisions felt like a different kind of conversation than the one they were now having. Garrett was standing by the window. Fallon was in the doorway. The drive was on the table beside the bed, no longer in Garrett's jacket, sitting in plain sight the way things sat when they had been secured and the need for concealment had passed. Cho walked in and looked at the drive and looked at Reeves and looked at Emma. Her eyes moved the way Garrett's eyes moved, and Emma's eyes moved, systematically and without rest, reading the room as a set of conditions rather than a set of furniture. Shepherd, Cho said. Emma Calloway, Emma said. Mercy General, night shift. Cho held her gaze for a moment. Something passed between them that had the character of 2 people recognizing each other across a significant distance. Not personal history, but professional history, the kind that accumulated in particular fields and left marks that people in those fields could read. Emma Calloway, Cho said. She accepted the correction without performing acceptance. Talk to me. Emma talked. She was precise and sequential and economical, the way she was about everything, and she covered the night from the moment Reeves came through the doors to the moment Donna wrote down the contact number on the 2nd floor. And she did it in approximately 4 minutes without repetition or unnecessary color. And when she was done, the room was quiet in the way rooms were quiet when something comprehensive had just been delivered. Cho looked at the drive. Chain of custody from the time of the patient's arrival. Reeves had it secured on his person during transport and intake, Emma said. He identified its location to Garrett at approximately midnight. Garrett has had it since. Unbroken. Cho looked at Garrett. Garrett confirmed with a nod. Cho looked at her colleague, who opened the bag that clinked and produced an evidence container that he set on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man for whom procedure was not bureaucracy, but protection. I need everyone who handled the drive to give me a formal statement before they leave this room, Cho said, and I need the patient's statement as soon as he's medically cleared to give it. He can give it now, Reeves said. Cho looked at him. You're 40 minutes post-surgery. I've given statements in worse condition, Reeves said, and the timeline matters. Cho held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down and said, Start from the beginning. Reeves started from the beginning. Peter stood in the corner of the bay and listened and understood. In pieces and then all at once, the full shape of what Reeves had been carrying alone for 3 months. The acquisition network, 11 names, restricted military hardware moving through a distribution route that ran within 40 miles of this hospital. 6 years of Shale building something inside the structure of the institution he served. Not quickly, not carelessly, but with the patient architectural intelligence of someone who understood that the safest corruption was the kind that looked exactly like competence from every angle except the one you weren't supposed to look from. And Emma, positioned here like a chess piece on a board she hadn't known she was on, working her shifts and saving her lives, and building the thing she believed was hers, while above her, at a distance she couldn't measure because she didn't know to measure it, Shale watched and maintained and kept his asset exactly where he wanted her, until Reeves bled onto her floor. At 2:31, Cho's colleague stepped outside to make a call. He came back 2 minutes later and said 2 words to Cho that Peters didn't catch. Cho looked up from her notepad. Shale's device just pinged, she said. Dulles Airport, International Terminal. The room moved. Garrett was on his radio before Cho finished the sentence. Fallon was already in the corridor. Emma looked at Cho with an expression that asked the question without using words. We have people at Dulles, Cho said. We've had them there since I got in the car. She said it with the calm of someone who had thought 3 moves ahead before leaving her house. He's not getting on a plane. Emma held her gaze. You were already moving on him. Before tonight. Reeves wasn't the only person building a case, Cho said. He was the fastest, and he had something I didn't have yet. She glanced at the drive on the table. The recording. "How long have you been working this?" Emma said. 8 months, Cho said. 8 months. Emma had been at this hospital for 11. Cho had been 3 months behind her, building toward the same destination from a different direction. And neither of them had known about the other, which was either a catastrophic failure of coordination or exactly what happened when a network was careful enough and a leak was high enough, and the people trying to stop it were operating in separate silos precisely because the man who ran the leak had access to the communication between those silos. "He kept us separated," Emma said. "Yes," Cho said, simply. "He's very good at what he does." "Was," Emma said. Cho looked at her. The look had something in it that was almost approval and almost something warmer than approval. "Was," she confirmed. At 2:44, Garrett's radio produced a voice that said 3 words. Peters heard them clearly from across the room. The 3 words were, "Subject is contained." Garrett relayed them to the room with no expression on his face, except the controlled exhale of a man who had been holding a significant amount of tension in his chest for a very long time, and was now, cautiously, beginning to release it. Reeves closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Emma was checking his IV line when he opened them again. She didn't look at him immediately, giving him the privacy of the moment, the way she gave patients the privacy of the moments they needed, even when she was standing 3 feet away. "It's done," Reeves said. "Shale is contained," Emma said. "The rest takes time. But it's done." Emma looked at him then. His face had a quality she hadn't seen on it yet tonight. Not relief exactly. Reeves was not a man built for simple relief. It was something more like the particular piece of a person who had carried something to exactly the place it needed to go and had set it down and could now, finally, stop moving. "It's done," Emma said. Reed, who had been present in the room through all of Reeves' statement, with the expression of a man attending a seminar on a subject he had not known existed until tonight, cleared his throat with considerably less authority than his throat clearings usually carried. "I need to check the surgical repair," he said, not to the room, to Reeves, directly. The way he spoke to patients when politics had been temporarily set aside and medicine was the only thing in the room. "If you've been talking for 40 minutes straight at this blood pressure, I want to see what the anastomosis is doing." Reeves looked at Reed with the measuring quality he brought to every new assessment. "You're the one who did the regional block." "I am," Reed said. "Garrett told me you objected to moving the patient," Reeves said, "on medical grounds, in a situation where," he paused, "where that objection was not the easy call." Reed was quiet for a moment. "The easy call and the right call are not always the same call," he said. He said it without performing wisdom, just stating a thing he had apparently arrived at through the specific experience of the last 3 hours. "I'm aware of that, sometimes more than other times." Reeves held his gaze for another second. Then he said, "Do your assessment, doctor." Reed did his assessment. The anastomosis was holding. The repair was intact. Reeves's blood pressure was climbing toward the range Reed had said he'd need to see before he'd consider any kind of discussion about longer-term care and transport. Reed delivered all of this in the direct, technical language of a man who respected his audience enough not to soften the information. And Reeves received it with the direct attention of a man who understood and wanted the truth rather than a comfortable version of it. And Peters watched the exchange and thought that, in a different world, in a world where these 2 people had met without the night that preceded the meeting, they might have gotten along well. Cho stood and closed her notepad at 3:07 in the morning. She had statements from Emma, from Garrett, from Fallon, from Peters, from Harris, who had been brought up from the floor below, and from Donna, who had been brought up from the second-floor administrative office by Fallon at 2:50 with her hands at her sides and her reading glasses still on her forehead, and an expression that was doing the difficult work of containing 23 years of careful construction collapsing in a single night. Emma had looked at Donna once, when Fallon brought her through the bay door. Just once. Donna had looked back. The look between them lasted 4 seconds and contained everything and nothing. All the coffee cups and all the quiet and all the small kindnesses that had been both real and instrumental simultaneously. All the genuine and the false intertwined so thoroughly that even now, at 3 in the morning, with the full picture assembled, Emma could not entirely separate them. "Was any of it real?" Emma said. Donna looked at her. "More than you'd think," she said. Emma held her gaze for another second. Then she said, "That makes it worse," and turned back to the forestand, and Donna was walked out by Fallon, and that was the end of whatever had been between them. At 3:15, Cho pulled Emma into the corridor. Not for a statement, the official statements were done. This was something else. Emma stood across from Cho in the corridor with the hospital running quiet around them, and the night pressing against the windows, and looked at the woman who had been 3 months behind her for 8 months. "You're going to be asked to give a full debrief," Cho said. "Not tonight, in the next week. Everything about your time in the unit, your knowledge of the network, your interactions with Shale, going back to the beginning. It will be thorough and it will take time." "I know how debriefs work," Emma said. "I know you do," Cho said. She paused, not for effect, for something genuine. "I also want you to know that your placement here, the way Shale structured it, none of that creates any obligation or any liability on your part. You were used without your knowledge. The record will reflect that." Emma was quiet. "And your position here," Cho continued, "your nursing credentials, your employment at this hospital, none of what happened tonight affects any of that. That's yours, legitimately and entirely yours." Emma looked at Cho. She was waiting for the but. There was always a but in her experience after a sentence that ended with something being yours. The but was where the cost was itemized. "There's no but," Cho said, reading her with the accuracy of someone who had been doing this long enough to know exactly what silence meant. "I'm telling you straight, you built something here that is not contingent on anything Shale did or intended. It stands on its own." Emma breathed. "He chose this hospital," she said, "because of the distribution route, because of the acquisition network's geography." "Yes. So nothing about how I ended up here was—" "The placement was his," Cho said. "What you did with it was yours. There's a meaningful difference." Emma thought about this. She thought about 11 months of showing up and doing the work and learning the names of the staff and knowing which patients needed what before they knew themselves, and standing in trauma bays in the middle of the night and making the calls that needed making. She thought about Donna's coffee cups. She thought about Peter's, who had grown up by about 5 years tonight and would probably never entirely recover from the experience, which was not necessarily a bad thing. She thought about Reed, who had operated on a man he'd never met, with a technique and a care that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the part of himself that the politics had been slowly burying. She thought about the badge on her scrubs, Emma Calloway. "It stands," Emma said. "It stands," Cho confirmed. At 3:29, the door to Bay 12 opened, and Peters came into the corridor. He looked at Emma and then at Cho, and then back at Emma. His face had the look of someone delivering information he was not entirely sure was welcome. "Reeves wants to talk to you," he said to Emma. "Alone." Cho stepped back. Emma went in. The bay was quiet. Garrett and Fallon had moved to the corridor. Reed had gone to check on his other patients, the ones who had been living their own medical dramas tonight, entirely unaware of what had been moving through the building around them. The monitors ran their steady language. Reeves was lying with his head slightly elevated, his color better than it had been at any point since he'd come through the doors. He looked like someone who had come very close to an edge and had pulled back. Not gracefully, not without cost, but decisively. He looked like someone who was still here. Emma stood at the bedside. She did not pull up a chair. Standing felt right for this conversation. "You saved my life twice," Reeves said. "Tonight and 4 years ago." "Tonight was a team effort," Emma said. 4 years ago wasn't. She held his gaze. 4 years ago was the job. For you, Reeves said. For me it was the reason I'm in a room instead of a file. He paused. The pause had weight. I'm sorry I brought this here. I'm sorry I pulled you back into it. Emma was quiet for a moment. You didn't pull me back, she said. It turns out I never fully left. Shale made sure of that. She looked at the monitor. At the blood pressure reading she'd been chasing all night, now sitting at 110/70 in holding. But that's over now. Is it? Reeves said, not challenging, genuinely asking. The question of a man who had been in this particular business long enough to know that over was a word that required careful verification. Shale is contained, Emma said. The drive is in Cho's custody. 11 names, the recording. Harris and 3 others in custody. Donna. She paused. The network doesn't survive this. Not with this level of documentation. No, Reeves agreed. It doesn't. Then it's over, Emma said. Reeves looked at her for a long time, with the specific kind of attention that this man gave to things he was trying to remember accurately and permanently. Are you going to stay? He said. Here, this hospital. Emma looked at the badge, at the door. At the corridor beyond it, where Peters was probably still watching camera feeds, out of professional habit even though the threat was contained, where Marcus had probably finally left his post by the door, where Reed was doing rounds with the quiet thoroughness of a man rediscovering something he'd temporarily lost track of. Yes, she said. Good, Reeves said. Get some sleep, Emma said. Your pressure is where I want it, and your repair is holding, and you have a debrief in a week that's going to require you to be coherent. So sleep. Bedside manner, Reeves said. 11 months of practice, Emma said, for the second time. But this time there was something different in it. The first time she'd said it, there had been something slightly defended in it, something that was protecting the 11 months against the context of the night, insisting on their legitimacy. This time there was no defense in it, just the clean statement of a fact about who she was. She turned from the bed and walked out of the bay. The corridor at 3:42 in the morning had the quality of a space after something enormous had moved through it. Not destroyed, not fundamentally altered, but marked. Peters was at the nurse's station. Cho was packing her materials at the end of the corridor. Garrett and Fallon were in quiet conversation near the stairwell door. Harris was being processed in a room down the hall by 2 people who had arrived with Cho and whose specific function Peters had not inquired about. Emma went to the nurse's station. She sat down, for the first time in hours, on the chair behind the desk. She looked at the camera feeds. She looked at the scheduling board. She looked at the list of active patients on the floor. All of them, not just Bay 12, all the people who had been sick and in pain in this building tonight, in the ordinary way, the way that didn't involve encrypted drives or military operators or 23 years of careful deception. She pulled up Mr. Garza's file. Patient from 3 weeks ago, the one whose drainage tube she'd adjusted on her 3rd night. She checked his discharge summary. Went home, full recovery. She closed the file. Reed came around the corner and stopped at the nurse's station. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the break room. He set one on the desk in front of Emma without comment. The gesture was so precisely, structurally similar to what Donna had done for months, that it landed with a complicated weight that neither of them acknowledged. Emma looked at the coffee, then she looked at Reed. You should know, Reed said, that I intend to file a formal incident report about tonight. He said it with his chin slightly elevated, in the voice of a man who was doing something his character had historically resisted and was doing it anyway. The transfer order that was generated fraudulently using hospital systems and your badge number, the security breach, all of it. He paused. I also intend to note in that report that the shift lead nurse on duty tonight handled a complex and dangerous situation with exceptional clinical and operational competence. Emma looked at him for a moment. You don't have to do that. I'm aware, Reed said. Page 47. Emma looked at him for another moment. Then she said, thank you. Reed picked up his coffee. He was quiet for a second in the way of someone who had something else and was deciding whether it was the right time. It probably wasn't the right time. It was 4 in the morning after the longest night of both their lives, and right time was a luxury that this particular conversation had never been offered. "I owe you an apology," he said. Emma said nothing. "The drainage tube, Garza, the other incidents. I made it professional policy to undermine your judgment in front of staff, and I did it because your competence made me—" He stopped, started again. "I did it because I'd spent 20 years being the most capable person in this wing, and I was not prepared to reckon with someone who operated at a level I didn't have context for." He paused. "I have context now." Emma picked up the coffee. She drank from it. She thought about 20 years of institutional contempt and 3 months of public corrections, and the morning he had twisted her wrist in front of witnesses and thrown her chart on the floor, in the way nobody in that room had moved or spoken. She thought about the regional block and the anastomosis, and subject is contained, and coffee set on a desk without comment. "Context changes things," she said. "Yes," Reed said, "it does." He walked away down the corridor toward his office, and Emma watched him go with the specific equanimity of someone who had decided, without ceremony, that the ledger on Harlan Reed was neither settled nor entirely unsettled, but was for tonight put down. Peters appeared beside her. He sat on the edge of the desk in the way he always sat when he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. "So," he said. "So," Emma said. "That was—" He stopped, tried again. "I don't have a word for what that was." "You don't need one," Emma said. "Are you actually okay?" he said. He said it with the directness of someone who had earned the right to ask it twice. Emma considered the question honestly. She thought about Shale's face across a desk in Virginia, telling her she'd earned her rest. She thought about 11 months of unknowing. She thought about Donna's coffee cups and the board restructuring and the specific grief of discovering that a thing you thought was free had been, from the start, on someone else's leash. She thought about Reeves saying you were done, you were out, you were clean, and the fact that it hadn't been entirely true, and the fact that it had been true enough, because what she had done with the 11 months was hers, regardless of how she'd gotten there. "I will be," she said. Peters nodded. He accepted that the way she said it, because it was the truth rather than a performance of the truth, and he had learned enough tonight to know the difference. Cho stopped at the nurse's station on her way to the elevator. She looked at Emma. "Week from Monday," she said. "I'll send you the details." "I'll be here," Emma said. Cho nodded once, with the economy of a woman who did not waste motions, and walked to the elevator with her colleague and the evidence bag that held the drive and 11 names and a recording of a meeting and the documented end of something that had been running for 6 years inside the institution that was supposed to prevent exactly that thing. The elevator closed. The floor was quiet. At 4:08 in the morning, Emma Calloway, night shift trauma nurse, shift lead by circumstance and by choice, got up from the nurse's station and did her rounds. She checked every patient on the floor in sequence. She adjusted an IV in Bay 3. She spoke quietly to a woman in Bay 7 who had been awake and frightened and who needed someone to speak to her with a specific calm that said, "Everything is being handled. You are not alone. The night is almost done." She checked the monitors in Bay 9 and Bay 10 and Bay 11. She stood in the doorway of Bay 12 and looked at Reeves breathing steady and slow, and at the monitors running their clean green language, and at the empty chair where Cho had taken his statement, and at the table where the drive had sat. She thought about the name Shepard, about the weight of it and the years inside it, and the person she had been when she answered to it. She thought about what Reeves had said 4 years ago in a place that didn't officially exist, carried 400 meters under fire, "I weigh 230. She thought about the particular math of that, of what it cost and what it meant, and what it said about who she was at the most fundamental level. Not the operator, Not the nurse, just the person underneath both of those. The one who looked at someone who needed carrying and did not calculate the weight before she moved. She pulled the bay door almost closed and walked back to the nurse's station. She sat down. She pulled up the intake log for the next shift. She began her handoff notes, writing in the clean, precise language she always used, documenting each patient's status, each active order, each thing the day shift would need to know to carry the work forward without interruption. She wrote Reeves' entry last. Warrant Officer Daniel Reeves, post-surgical, stable, blood pressure, holding, restricted bay, security clearance required for access, attending surgeon Dr. H. Reed, nursing oversight E. Calloway. She read it back. It was accurate. It was complete. It was exactly what the next person needed to do the job. She saved it. Outside, through the windows she never looked at for too long, because looking out windows was a habit she'd never fully developed, and probably never would. The dark had begun the long, slow negotiation with the light, that eventually, every morning without exception, the light won. Emma Calloway clipped her badge to her scrubs, picked up her coffee, and went back to work. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, and for the first time in 11 months, every part of that sentence was entirely true.